Morning, everyone. Good morning. So, we're now in our last day of this great meeting. It's been awesome. I'm really loving this week with all of you guys. And today is my pleasure to introduce Professor Juni Gruber here. And Juni is her fourth time here in Brazil. And we become super friend. I really love June and Sabrina as well. Sabrina is in her third time here, and yeah, fourth as well. Oh yeah, you're from the very beginning. Yeah. Fourth. No, because yesterday we started discussing that.
You're five.
You're five.
Oh,
Yeah, the first time it was in Zoom, and it's her fourth time here in Brazil. We are doing many things in collaboration, and it's a pleasure to receive you here, Juni, again. It's awesome. Uh, Juni is an associate professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of Colorado and director of the Positive Emotion and Psychopathology Laboratory. She was previously an assistant professor of psychology at Yale University before relocating to Boulder. She received her PhD in clinical psychology and BA in psychology from UC Berkeley. Professor June Gruber has authored over 100 articles and chapters and edited 2 books that focus on mental health and positive emotion with a focus on bipolar and related mood disorders. This month, she's releasing the 14th edition of the classic book Psychology, co-author with Dave Myers and Nathan DeWall. I think most of people that do psychology already used that book. It's a major achievement. Congratulations, June, it's awesome. So I think it's on, you are releasing the English version now in October, and hope soon in Portuguese, very soon, yeah. Her work has been recognized by several awards, including the Association for Psychological Sciences Rising Star Award and the APS Janet Taylor Spence Award for Transformative Career Contributions, the NASA Young Investigator Award, and Yale University's Arthur Greer Memorial Prize for Outstanding Junior Faculty. Dr. Juni teaches courses on topics including emotion, affective science, psychopathology, and happiness, and has created a free online course in human emotion available through YouTube. If you never watch these videos on YouTube, you must see. It's an amazing series of interviews with great experts on emotions. So from Naomi Eisenberg to Paul Ekman to Lisa Feldman to James Gross, so all these great guys from psychology doing emotional research, different approach to in terms of methodology and also in terms of theories and constructs. So it's something amazing, and it's free, short interviews, and it's a good way to approach to these guys, to these theories, to these models, and to learn about emotion. It's a beautiful thing. And she has given a public TEDx talk on the dark side of happiness. Yeah, it has his dark side. She's the recipient of the 2020 Europe Outstanding Faculty Member Award, has a monthly column for young scientists in science, and received an IMPART grant to co-lead a workshop focused on advancing underrepresented women in the sciences. About this, she's another amazing woman doing psychological research. Recently published a paper on women in psychological research. It's a beautiful paper. Anyone should read that paper. It's super. It's so cool and important, and it's in a time to read that paper. It's time to read this kind of things. And blah, blah, blah. And Dr. Gruber is engaged in science outreach and dissemination of the science of emotions and mental health for students and the broader public, with a recent focus on the mental health crisis sparked by the COVID pandemic. So thank you very much, Juni, for joining us here again in Brazil. It's a long trip, but yeah, you are always invited. We love every time you come here. We learn all times you come here. We are learning a lot, and yeah, so thank you very much.
Can I turn these lights? Got the fancy mic. Let me see. I'll just hold it. Is this good? No?
You can use that.
rock star one. Okay.
The rock star, yeah. You are a rock star.
Is that good? Okay. Thanks for having me here today. I was thinking a lot about the future, as in this morning, but short-term future, long-term future. But just thinking a bit about the role of positive emotions in mental health and kind of how we can think together about where the future goes, both theoretically and also some maybe important and timely opportunities to use it to apply towards real-world emotional health challenges that young adults are facing. So my thought is to kind of tell you a little bit about what I do, some themes in the work, some applications to young adults and thinking about mental health, but hopefully to kind of spur some generative conversations and opportunities for collaboration. So I have a roadmap. This is something I always do. I always tell my students, have a roadmap in your talk. So this is where we'll be going today. I'll start just with like a foundation and kind of why we should care about troubles people may have with positive emotions and how it's a complement to kind of earlier waves of research in what was known as the positive psychology movement, and how we need to really consider positive emotions in a more kind of broad context. Both times they can be adaptive, but also not. I'll talk about some emerging themes in this work that we've been studying relating to emotional diversity, metacognitive values about emotions people place on happiness, and thinking about how emotions really change dynamically over time. And then thinking about the future forward, kind of as Paolo and I were talking in some of our conversations about student mental health here on campus at Mackenzie, like what about young adults? How can we leverage some of these findings to really apply them towards studying some of our most vulnerable individuals in society? So I'll start with kind of a background in positive emotion disturbance and kind of why I got into it and why I found it kind of a compelling scientific question, but one that has public health importance as well. I direct a lab called the Positive Emotion and Psychopathology Lab, and in that lab, we kind of start with an understanding that positive emotions are this critical component of human existence. And there's been a wave of really robust evidence suggesting the many salutary and beneficial effects of positive emotions. We know that they foster creative thinking, right? They promote physical immunity to stress. They're involved in kind of motivational goal seeking, helping us strive for goals, sort of savor them when we attain them. And as many in this room know, they're sort of the cement and glue of social bonds, right? They play such a key role in sort of friendship initiation and maintenance over time. At the same time, that's not the whole picture of positive emotions. And there's been a recent kind of new wave of research, and I grew up near the ocean and I procrastinate making slides, so I'm like, wave. So a new wave of research, though, too, in parallel, that's consistent but distinct, saying we have to think about positive emotions in moderation, kind of going back to Aristotelian principles of moderation, that in excess, when positive emotions are experienced too intensely and perhaps at the wrong time or perhaps not effectively harnessed, we see it associated with problematic substance use. So we're talking about the kind of substance abuse that can put someone's safety at risk. They're associated, one of my colleagues does work on unsafe sexual activity, spending sprees, and there's interesting literature on pathological gambling and heightened reward sensitivity. And to get really grim, it's linked to greater mortality risks. So there's been these longitudinal studies of these highly cheerful children who were rated by teachers and parents and followed over time, and they had higher mortality rates. So it's not to say kids shouldn't be happy and smile, but it's saying there's something about when you're at that upper end of the continuum that may make you less inhibited, less sensitive to detecting threats, and maybe a little bit sort of positive in the sense that these rosy-colored glasses may be obscuring our view of the diverse emotional landscape in front of us. So this has really motivated me and my team to try to get some word out to think about kind of comprehensively positive emotions. Both we joke the light and dark sides, but really under what context and what boundary conditions can we harness them adaptively, and on other aspects might they be maladaptive. And with my clinical psych colleagues, I edited a book where we tried to look at the role of positive emotions across a variety of clinical disorders and really showed there are challenges in different ways with positive emotions, from depression to anxiety to schizophrenia to bipolar disorder, etc. So this is a growing field, which is exciting, kind of seeing the number of articles looking at positive emotions and mental health growing. And for me, what I really love about this field is the interdisciplinary contributions. So I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so grateful that the majority of colleagues I work with, nothing against clinical psychology people, I'm one of them, but I get the opportunity to work with a lot of people from a lot of different disciplines, and I truly love that, including philosophers, not just my husband, but also getting a chance to work with my colleagues in computer science and in sociology, working with a colleague right now in geography that's looking at the impact of the environment and its impact on mental health and positive emotions. So it's a fun field to be part of, and to really tackle these questions, you need to come at it from multiple angles. So with that, I'll just briefly say where I got started in this, what I think is an exciting landscape, and then we'll move to these emerging empirical themes and where do we go looking ahead. So just a little story of how I got started was that I came in contact with people who had a lived history of mania, which is the core feature of bipolar disorder. I was an undergraduate shadowing a psychiatrist in an inpatient unit, kind of following her around, and for the first time I saw something that looked really different than the kind of positivity that I was studying in my undergraduate coursework at the time, in sort of the heyday of the positive psychology movement, where it was about thinking positive thoughts, expressing positivity, kind of a maximization principle. And yet here I saw someone in a very acute state, at a very difficult time in their life, but yet their sort of countenance, their outward expression was cheerful, laughing, having a lot of kind of high arousal, positive energy. And I thought, why aren't we studying this? And so this is where I kind of began to think that we have a lot to learn about positive emotions by also studying clinical populations. They'll not only teach us about bipolar disorder, which has significant public health impacts. It's one of the top 10 leading causes of worldwide disability and has the highest suicide rate of all psychiatric disorders. So there's a great public health need to understand bipolar disorder. And it teaches us about the boundary conditions of positive emotions more generally. So I got interested in this, and I always like to share a little qualitative description by Kay Jamison. I don't know if any of you have read her book, Unquiet Mind. She's a psychiatrist at UCLA, and herself has a lived history of bipolar disorder. And she writes in her periods of mania, she says, when you're high, it's tremendous. The ideas and feelings are fast and frequent like shooting stars, and you follow them until you find better and brighter ones. Shyness goes, the right words and gestures are suddenly there, the power to captivate others a felt certainty. Sometimes my students will say, well, what's so bad about that? Like, that actually sounds sort of desirable. And you say, but it's not just that, right? The fast ideas are also far too fast, and there are far too many. Overwhelming confusion replaces clarity. Memory goes, humor and absorption of friends' faces are replaced by fear and concern. So we did initially about a decade worth of research to really map what does positive emotion look like in these people, and what can that teach us about lessons about positive emotions more generally. So when it came to bipolar disorder, we sort of delineated this model we called positive emotion persistence, or PEP. And from this, what we sort of found, which was really interesting, is that if you compared individuals, either young adults at risk or those who had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder in yellow to those who hadn't in blue, and you looked at the patterns of their emotional responding in positively valence contexts, negatively, or neutral, a few themes emerged. And this was sort of striking to me. So we first found that indeed our bipolar individuals had a greater magnitude of positive emotional reactivity. But what really struck me is that this didn't just confine itself to positive context, it seemed to really persist across contexts. So we found they would experience greater positive emotions in even negative contexts when they're sharing a distressing event with a friend, or they're watching a disgusting scene from Trainspotting and some of these standardized film stimuli. And importantly, it seemed to be that their emotions were more unstable, less diverse. It was a really constrained range of high arousal positive emotions. So why should we care about that? And the reason we should care is this teaches us some general lessons about positive emotions too, that it's not about feeling happy all the time. It's actually about thinking about the importance of like context-appropriate positive emotions, and that there's different emotions for different contexts. We continued this work, and to this day still do work trying to understand what could drive this kind of positive emotion. We look at driving factors, the kind of attentional biases people might have towards orienting preferentially to positive stimuli. Paolo and I worked on a paper on that. And then we look at the kinds of emotion regulation profiles that can keep some people stuck in certain positive states, right? Like rumination or a kind of failure to engage in more adaptive strategies like cognitive reappraisal. So this really opened the door in some ways to not only understanding one of the most costly mood disorders, but to opening the door and thinking about how can positive emotions go awry and what can that teach us? What lessons can we kind of garner more generally? So as we've moved forward into emerging themes, we've begun delineating it. And I'm trying to play around with alliteration here, trying to make my 4th grade teacher proud. You know, kind of the stuff we learned through mania was that emotions, you know, it's about the size, like having too much of an emotion, right, can be problematic. That the situation's important, that emotions serve goals in particular contexts and situations, and the emotion really needs to be tuned into the goals of that setting. And when it's not, then there can portend different sort of functioning challenges. That specificity, so I grew up in the kind of west coast of California where we were really taught the importance of what's called discrete emotions, that different emotions have unique functional profiles. And when it comes to positive emotions, a lot of the literature would just have an umbrella term of happiness or wellness. But you really had to kind of parse that apart in a more nuanced way and see there's a variety of positive emotions that each have different functions, from awe to compassion to gratitude to enthusiasm to pride. And we need to pay attention to those differences because they matter. And when it came to mania, it wasn't about all positive emotions are elevated. It was a really specific kind of like reward-focused, self-focused kind of profile, pride and joy, and not other emotions. In fact, compassion is intact. We don't see any differences. And importantly, like we look at the strategies people use to manage their emotions and finding part of what might be going on here is, you know, getting stuck in certain ruminative cycles, having a repertoire of strategies that people aren't using very effectively to help rein those emotions in. And those are lessons for all of us to learn, even if we may or may not have a history of bipolar disorder. So this then kind of moved to a next generation, kind of broadening our landscape, thinking sort of beyond mania of how can we learn about these themes more generally in the community and with respect to other mental health outcomes. So this brought us to different themes that I want to walk you through. Starting with spice, and by spice I mean like diversity of emotions and how critical that is. And I'll start with this by talking about when we think about diversity, the first thing that often comes up is biodiversity, right? Especially we talk about here the degradation of the Amazon rainforest, how biodiversity is the like critical component to sustaining our planet. It's the biggest threat to our planet, to our survival as a species. And the reason why biodiversity is so critical is that it, you know, helps foster resistance to disease, pathogens, invasive species. So if we kind of play with this metaphor, kind of leveraging this metaphor to the human mind, if you play with me, might some sense of like emotional diversity actually play a similarly critical role to our internal psychological health in our own emotional ecosystem. And I thought this was really interesting because a lot of the conversations in affective science functionally have been about sort of minimizing negative emotion experience and intensity and amplifying positive emotions, as if these labels we put on them, positive and negative, somehow imply some inherent value to them. And so we wondered, though, and we looked back at kind of early evolutionary theories of emotion, Paul Ekman and the like, that all emotions have a functional purpose. And so might we actually be better off if we accept and allow a variety of different emotions? So we studied this with my colleague, Jordi Koidbach, and others in large cross-sectional samples of adults in the US and in Europe. First, just looking at these community samples and these large online surveys, looking at emotions that they reported experiencing in their daily lives. And what was really interesting at first is these were a couple prototypical participants who had almost nearly identical mean or average levels of negative in blue and positive in yellow emotions. So in many studies, we would consider them roughly parallel. But they had very different levels of emotional diversity, different gradations or shades of blue and yellow. And so we thought this is really interesting because it seems to be an independent component from mean affective intensity. But you're wondering, like, how did we compute emotional, or it really was called emo diversity in the paper. So not that kind of emo, but we borrowed from the Shannon Biodiversity Index. We sort of looked to our colleagues in the natural sciences and how they quantify biodiversity. And the two critical components of this refer to the richness or the number of specific emotions and individual experiences, and what's also called the evenness, or the extent to which these emotions are experienced in the same proportion. There's a not too complex formula, but and we have syntax saved if anyone wants to do this themselves in either SPSS or Excel, not in R yet, but you can translate, where effectively it allows you, based on this computation, to have higher scores which reflect more diverse emotional experiences, or what we call global emotion diversity. In our initial studies, in these kind of large cross-sectional studies, we found that it seemed to be tracking something, that greater emotional diversity, positive and negative emotions in everyday life, predicted fewer symptoms of depression, and what we called what seemed to be indicators of physical health, fewer visits to the family doctor, fewer hospital-related costs, fewer days spent in the hospital. We've since followed some of these results up, and some of our colleagues have, showing that greater emotional diversity is also associated with reduced kind of physical markers of inflammation, and some work has also linked this, and some of this MIDAS study in the Midwest, to fewer general symptoms of anxiety and depression among adults. We've now been looking at some emotional diversity, tracking it over the course of treatment for cognitive behavioral therapy as well, looking at the importance of building greater emotional diversity. I'll talk louder. So, so this, I think, is interesting because it suggests that we don't just want to foster positive emotions, we want to foster diverse emotions. Not just positive, but also positive and negative. We've also looked within the shades of yellow, just you can look individually, valenced at positive emotional diversity, or separately negative as well, and that there's not just one type of emotion. In the kind of individualistic cultures of the US, there's this prioritization on high arousal, joy, and enthusiasm. But we actually do better when we adopt a wide variety of positive states, other-focused, low arousal. So just a theme to think about that I hope we talk about further. Because especially in this day when there's maybe young adults report feeling pressure to be positive, even in the face of very challenging times, I say accept all emotions, because they're giving you information about your environment, and they may actually be good for your health. But they're skeptics. So I always show this cartoon because there's the angry cat. He says, I'm angry. The dog says, he's like diverse dog. He goes, it's okay to be angry. It's good to feel a range of emotions. The cat says, no range, just anger. So to each their own, but I tell you that diversity may be helpful. There's also an interesting thing when we think about emotions, that we know they unfold over time, but we're often looking at them in these cross-sectional snapshots, rather than what are the natural temporal dynamics over time. How do they unfold in our daily lives, and how do we get people, we want to get them out of the lab, field studies, ESM studies, to better understand the way emotions unfold. So we did a study looking at weekly emotional stability among a sample of about 244 adults from the Denver community. And in this, they reported their emotional experiences at the end of each day for 14 consecutive days. So this is a daily diary study. And what we were really interested was looking at the intra-individual variability. So it's kind of like a within-person standard deviation, for lack of a better word. Like, how much did your positive emotions fluctuate or vary over time? And looking at that independent of your mean level of how intense your positive emotions were, and also independent of negative emotion intensity and independent of negative emotion variability. So we're not just picking up on like some sort of neuroticism tendency. These were two actual participants in our study, just for visualization purposes, to show people did differ. So the blue is like a participant who had a lot of variability in their positive emotions over the course of 2 weeks. And here's someone that had very low variability, a little more stable state. So when we looked at the role of positive emotion variability specifically, controlling for neuroticism, negative and positive mean intensity, negative emotion variability, to kind of ask the question, did it predict any meaningful outcomes above and beyond? We found that it did. And in fact, greater variability predicted greater depression, greater anxiety, lower life satisfaction, and lower functioning. So something about kind of the instability, you're high one day, low the next, that there may be something about emotional stability that may be very key. And that change over time, if that's your goal, may be in moderation and slow and steady, but that fluctuations in positive emotions in and of themselves may actually be deleterious. The last emerging theme I'll close with is looking at more of these metacognitive values. We don't just passively experience emotions, we have beliefs about them. We have what are called desires about effectively what we want to feel, right? And so this is some work done with a colleague of mine, Iris Mouse at Berkeley, where we asked people about their happiness beliefs. How much do they want to be happy? How much do they value being happy? And I'll say the US is a funny place in a lot of ways, don't get me started. The founding fathers had a lot of issues. One of them, maybe more minor among the grand scheme of problems, was this notion in like the Declaration of Independence of like, it's life, it's liberty, I have this, my right to be happy, right? This right of pursuing happiness. So it's very culturally ingrained in the US that like, I have my right to be me and be happy. And so we wondered about this. And we used a scale called the Happiness Valuation Scale, which included items such as feeling happy is extremely important to me, and if I don't feel happy, there's something wrong with me. In some of our initial work, we actually found that people who endorse higher values on this scale are not only less happy, but they're actually at greater risk for depression, for symptoms of bipolar disorder, and in some experimental work, researchers have found that they actually experience less happiness in positive contexts. So when watching a happy film, they report less positivity than those who score lower on the scale. The underlying thought is that when we accept these high extreme values, that we may set ourselves up for disappointment and actually paradoxically undermine the very pursuit of happiness we're trying to strive towards. Living in Boulder, I was kind of interested in whether it may amplify some of these maladaptive beliefs, right? Boulder has been named the happiest city in the US by National Geographic. You see these postcards everywhere, get happy in Boulder. And then I was in a museum with my son one day and they're flashing these things up on a screen and it says, this is so Boulder, but if happiness is a state of mind, then Boulder is its capital. So just a context that may amplify these beliefs further. And anecdotally, students will come to me and say, like, why am I not happy? I'm supposed to be happy here. You know, it's beautiful, there's all this stuff. So it's, when you sort of prime people for these beliefs, they can set people up in problematic ways. So we further extended this work. This is in a large sample of young adults here at Boulder. Looking at the same scale, this was a sample of first-year students, about 930 of them, and found some concerning outcomes consistent with what we've seen before. That not only valuing happiness was associated with greater mania and depression, we've seen that before. We also saw it was associated with non-suicidal self-harm. So this is cutting, burning, hurting oneself without the intention necessarily of taking one's life, but very problematic self-harm behavior, and lo and behold, lower subjective happiness. So I think about this, and I think about this quote by John Stuart Mill, who said, "Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness." So I just want to bring these themes up because I think they're really interesting, and I've been really captivated about the kind of boundary conditions of positivity and how it needs to be experienced in the right amount. More, we need to have it among a diverse menu of other emotions. Needs to be somewhat stable over time, and maybe something that is not a goal we seek in and of itself, and that very pursuit may paradoxically backfire. So as we kind of look forward, how do we think of some of this research? And I know we've been talking with colleagues, Paolo and all of you about how do we better leverage these insights to understand the mental health crisis young adults are facing. And so what about young adults? And I think young adults, we call this sometimes emerging adulthood from a developmental lifespan perspective, this period of time between adolescence and adulthood where it's a time of great resilience. You're often autonomous for the first time, a sense of agency, increased responsibility. You see some really beautiful kind of like cognitive maturation from like the cognitive neuroscience folks, B.J. Casey, Leah Somerville, and others. And at the same time, we know it's a great time of vulnerability for serious mental health disorders. Sometimes the initial onset of things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder first emerge. And we saw, predating the pandemic, a global mental health crisis on college campuses, many of which have students in this kind of 18 to 25 range. So we've been curious about this, and as we think of a path forward, I don't know, Sabrina and I were like, we got to include the logo from the conference. Where do we go? And I'll share a couple examples, but again, really excited to be here and think about next steps. So I think one path forward is thinking about the impact this ongoing pandemic has had. In some ways, and our campus acts like everything's fine again, but what you see is the wave of mental health concerns are actually worse now than they were back in 2020, because we've now been looking at the sequelae of young adults coping with sustained chronic stress. We know humans are pretty good at coping with acute intermittent stressors. We're not meant well or built well for chronic stress, and that's really what we've been enduring. So we're seeing the mental health challenges in some ways worse now than they were before. The U.S. Surgeon General and the New York Times, had this, call for the pandemic worsening young people's mental health. And in my field, I led a call to action. This is an American psychologist among 35 of my clinical psych colleagues, really about. We wrote a paper in 3 weeks. I have never done this before, nor with this many people, but we felt it was a little bit hectic. Google Docs saved the day, seriously. Just about the need to translate science into practice, and that we have a public health responsibility to begin to address this. So one way to begin to address this mental health crisis is to better understand precisely what it looks like. And I'll share just some initial findings from a study we did, a multi-site longitudinal. We called it natural experiment because the pandemic really was a natural experiment in social isolation and sort of rupturing social ties early on, and what have been the unfolding consequences. So we call this our Emerge project. These are some of our wonderful collaborators we've been grateful to work with. And I'll show you just a little sampling of some preliminary data from a subset of our participants, about 790 of them, for whom we had data fall 2019, not expecting this to be a pre-pandemic baseline, and then life happens. So I want to show you a little bit from these participants of what we've learned, because I think this is important to not make assumptions, to let the science guide us, and it didn't look the way we expected. So we initially, like many people, were kind of interested. This is a within subjects design of how did affective health and general life satisfaction change between what became pre-COVID and this initial COVID outbreak, when life really turned upside down for many young adults, right? They were removed from campus, removed from their classes. Many of them lost sources of economic stability or employment if they were working on campus. And we all remember those times we were suddenly and abruptly transitioned to remote learning, having no idea exactly what we were doing, right? What did that look like? And I think we all had our intuitions of what mental health might look like during that time. And the data said it was a little bit different. And I think of this again in the context of acute stress. So when we looked across all of our students, we saw no change in depression, right? So this was right during the outbreak of COVID. And I thought that was really surprising, right? I think many of us assumed that students in general were under great duress. But here's the role of where context starts to matter, and there's not a one-size-fits-all trajectory. When we looked at this index we had of COVID risk, which was an index looking at how much COVID had personally impacted their life Either physically, had they become ill, economically, had they lost sources of employment, socially, were they isolated, and we partitioned them into high and low COVID risk participants. Then we saw the importance of really thinking about the context of COVID that a person is in. And we saw depression increase, but only for our high-risk COVID participants. No changes for our low risk. With anxiety, what was really interesting is overall, we saw a very slight decrease in anxiety. And we thought, well, that's really interesting. Some people, you can imagine some of the people being removed from their stressful daily routine might have been a bit of a relief or a source of reprieve. But it wasn't, again, for everyone. It was only for those low-risk participants. So they're not getting sick. They have relative financial security. They're at home. Things might feel all right, and in fact, maybe a little relief from the stress of the day-to-day grind. So this taught me the importance of you've really got to pay attention to context. Even when you think it's a shared global stressor, it's looking different for different people. We also saw some important moderation by ethnicity as well. And so I could talk about that, but our white participants looked quite different from our Asian student participants as well. So we can't assume there's unidimensional impacts. The other thing we were curious about is timing. So COVID has been unfolding, and we've been continuing to follow these young adults up. This is just 1 year later, where it started to become more of a chronic stressor. And here what we learned is there's not just a long-haul risk of the physical infection, there's a long-haul mental health landscape. Here's where we then begin to see general trends across everyone. Things are getting worse at a more generalized level, where depression is now worsened over time across students. Anxiety had a little dip down but came back up, and a general decrease in life satisfaction. So this is where we need to think of the long-term trajectory and how students are doing. We've continued to follow this up and have just now cleaned data from these last 3 time points to begin to really look at longitudinal effects. And I think, really concerned and thinking about the role of change over time. So I do think this is an important piece we need to think about as we look forward, is where's the current landscape right now? The general takeaway, though, I think of these lessons of it's about COVID and students, but it's teaching us more generalized lessons. The role of context mattering, right? There's a lot of variability in affective changes depending on people's personal COVID risk and context. There's not a one-size story fits all. Some are doing better, some are doing a lot worse. The timing is critical, this kind of short versus long haul impact of COVID. And again, I think of the role of acute versus chronic stress. We're really good at mobilizing the acute stress, even some of the worst things you could imagine. But then we become fatigued. And that disparities exist. So we're doing some work now really looking at the amplified impact that students from historically marginalized and underrepresented backgrounds have been facing during this pandemic and predating. So along those lines, I think another path forward and why I'm so excited to work together is you guys have talked a lot about the problem with weird samples, right? And the need to better understand the true human experience across a variety of different contexts, right? We're talking about contexts that we grew up in and live in, and if we're going to understand the human mind, we really need to understand more than one very narrow subset of human minds. And so we've been really passionate about our work, understanding human experience across a variety of contexts. I just love the work we've been doing, Paolo. I'm so grateful for it. I can't wait to keep doing it, and I hope that's what we talk about today. Sabrina and I have been reminiscing over these photos and just how much we have to learn and how excited I am to work together. And even just our anecdotal experience, the whole cell phone story, that's not my goal of today, but the whole notion of what a bystander effect is, that was studied in individualistic context. And our anecdotal experience suggested this is not all people are like that when you're in a more other-oriented society. We've also been doing some work with Jeannie Tsai, looking at the valuation people have of emotion, her affect valuation theory, and that people's goals of what they want to feel varies greatly and is influenced greatly by cultural values more so than their actual emotion experience. my graduate student Cindy, in collaboration with Luisa, who some of you met last year, has been very interested in looking at cultural values among Mexican American students, and kind of really informed by cultural psych research on like the role of simpatia, the kind of cultural valuation around expressing positive emotions with the goal of like promoting social harmony. So we've been starting some work there. And then finally with a postdoc of mine and our colleague Shanmukh, looking among Indian young adults as well. So this is just like the beginning of really just understanding people and thinking ahead. And really at the end of the day, I always think about what we're trying to do and how we can make psychological science really ultimately contribute to a healthier, happier, and more sustainable world. And I love this quote by William James, because he said, "Act as if what you do makes a difference, because it does." So that's my lab team in different contexts over time, and thank you for your time today.
So thank you very much, Professor Jun, for a great talk. And it's interesting to see this data from your study, the natural experiment with people during the COVID. In Brazil, a group of researchers led by André Brunoni is a colleague of mine. They develop, they have a longitudinal study in Brazil for many years on mental health. And they found exactly the same things. So an enhancement of depression, but only for those that are at risk, a reduction of anxiety only for those that self-evaluated as having a good health, and also they find the opposite findings regarding female works with no social support, and some minorities. In this case, they found an increase of depression and an increase of the risk of anxiety. So, wow. Super similar to the data. Yeah, very similar to the data they find. Yeah. Okay, so let's open to questions. Who would like to start asking questions? Fernanda? I need to take the microphone.
Oh, I can answer.
Oh, there's another one. Okay.
We're good?
Yeah.
So many mics.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for your talk. It's always really nice to meet with you and to hear you. We always learn a lot. Me and Gabrielle were thinking about what you said about emotional stability and emotional diversity, and we were wondering if you know or if you have hypotheses for why does this difference happens? Like, is it something genetic? Is it about how people are raised? Is it about how much they think about emotion, or how much they're sensitive to their emotional context and whatsoever?
So like, what are the sources of individual variability and emotional diversity?
Yes.
I think it's really interesting. One of the things I would be really interested to understand, and from just like an equity perspective, is how much of this is also related to like we've controlled for socioeconomic status, but it's not a perfect indicator. But I do wonder how much, and I've talked about this with my student Cindy, how much of this is influenced just through education, like simply learning a wider repertoire of emotion words. Does that then help facilitate the labeling of diverse emotion experiences? That's an interesting question. Otherwise, I wonder too if there's like, individual difference personality variables. Even I think of like openness to experience, right? Might lead people to seek out experience and identify more diverse emotional experience. I think there's then also cultural values around emotions that are acceptable and not acceptable. Even gender differences in this way around the socialization of emotions. There's this really, as a mother of boys, I was reading this literature about the socialization of emotions, and even in young conversations between parents and kids, among young girls, there's a wider variety of emotional vocabulary used, and among young boys, it's a much more restricted range of emotions, and usually very kind of hyper-cognized or centered around anger. So there's like socialization differences too in how sometimes children are reared to, vocalize certain emotions as well and suppress others. So it's like, it's all really contextual factors, right? It's socialization, whether it's through the education system, gender biases, I think there's a lot of that. Plus, I think there is maybe individual differences in openness to experience. But I will say, there's not good empirical data on that very question, and I would love to see a study that did that. Like, what makes someone emotionally diverse, right? And if we know it has these potentially adaptive outcomes, might we want to know what contributes to it so that we better know how to foster it? So I think that would be an awesome project to do.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. That was such a cool talk. I guess one question that came to mind when you were talking about emotional diversity and depression and how there's these negative associations for both diversity of positive and negative emotions was just, do you have thoughts on the potential mechanisms that might be driving that relationship, particularly in the context of positive emotions? Like if it's something about some emotions that are only experienced, like low frequency emotions, when there are a wide variety of emotions being experienced by someone, or something about the experienced richness in general, or something about like the capacity for affect labeling that might be associated with high emotional diversity. I'm just curious what your thoughts are regarding like the mechanisms there.
I think that's really interesting about the affect labeling component, right? That there may be, is it really the actual internal experience, or is it just lower affect labeling, right? Which could be one. We did look at frequency of emotions, like controlling for intensity. And it didn't seem to be that like they're having more emotions, they're just like more muted and or attenuated in their intensity level. At least there wasn't data to like suggest that would be the case. I also think part of it might be, if you think in the context of depression, like this is what underlies behavioral activation treatment, like you're trying to get people out doing things. I think there could also be environmental contributions of like lowered social activity, withdrawal, which just provide fewer opportunities to have diverse emotional experiences and interactions, right? So there's that kind of complicated factor of like the kind of anhedonia and like psychomotor withdrawal that can then restrict just those opportunities to have the experiences, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess if I could ask one more question, I just was curious if you think this would be something that would be consistent across cultural contexts as well.
Yeah, so we've been thinking about it and would really like to look at this further. My suspicion is that like having diverse emotions would be adaptive across cultures, just from like a functionalist perspective of emotions, that emotions are supposed to be guiding us in our everyday lives and giving us information and telling us how to respond. So I feel like the outcomes would probably be generalizable across cultures, but whether there's differences in emotional diversity across cultures, that would be, I think, a really interesting thing to look at, especially from some of the cultural kind of psych perspectives, suggesting that there's different premiums placed on different emotions in different cultural contexts, and that you might imagine the US may be a much less diverse, on a whole, kind of cultural context where there's like very specific premiums placed, like Jeannie Tsai's work on just high arousal positive emotions. Whereas in other contexts where it's about kind of more acceptance of a range of emotions, I think we might see a broader diversity of emotions. Yeah, I love that question.
Hi, great talk. I mean, really, so much fascinating stuff. I have so many questions, but I'm going to confine myself to one.
Yeah.
Because right at the start, you talked about mania and bipolar disorder, and I was kind of wondering in my head, are there other mental illnesses that have a similar disbalance or imbalance, where there's, the positive emotions are taking over and the negative emotions are missing? So that's kind of my general question. Do you have any other examples of that? And I want to suggest one example that might be surprising and a bit of a tangent, but strikes me that's a feature of psychopaths, because psychopaths have, as a one category, shallow affect. And what that usually means is no remorse, no fear, no disgust. They're missing a lot of the negative emotions. But when you look on the positive side, the only successful training program for psychopaths used positive emotions and positive feedback. And when you ask them like how well you're doing, well, I interviewed one in a prison, and the guy said, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm doing 12. And you go, what do you mean? Well, when I get out of here, I'm going to have a great life. And you go, but you're still here for 10 years. That'll be easy. And you're going like, why is this person so happy, you know, in prison for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
So that's just one example. But my real question is, you know, are there others besides mania and bipolar where the positive creates problems by taking over?
Yeah. Well, first I was going to say, I think that's a really interesting comparison. We've been talking with Abby Marsh about just this and did some initial work with a student of mine on reward sensitivity and psychopathy, because we're interested in this very thing. I'll say there's no good, like, direct comparison between the two, but it seems at least like that in psychopathy it's like an absence of negativity, right, which may then bias the positivity. In mania, it's like there's no absence of negativity, but it's just that the amplification of the positivity is quite high. So
But they both have imbalance.
they both,
Different sorts.
yes, that's right. I think the other kind of difference is that the kind of reward sensitivity you see across the board. And it's really interesting, at least in psychopathy, from the work that's there, there's not a ton. It seems to be a little bit more domain specific, the things that are like, that they're reward sensitive to. But that being said, I've been wanting to do that direct comparison for some time and talked with her about it because there's some aspects that are quite interesting, the kind of like sociability, charming behavior, driven by different things, but both can be very charismatic. So I think that would be fascinating to study further. I will say, there's nothing quite like mania in the other clinical disorders. I think there's variants of like greater heightened like reward reactivity. You see it sometimes in substance abuse, but it's really specific to like the particular cues of like the substance of choice. You see a little bit of this in what's called pathological gambling. But in these contexts, you do see the heightened kind of positivity. It's just very like domain specific. Whereas in mania, it seems to kind of like you're stuck in a high gear that you can't sort of shift flexibly out of, and it spans or permeates across contexts. So I think that's unique about it, but I don't think it's the only context that has greater positivity. They're just in more specific domains. There's some interesting research in autism spectrum disorders that when there's this kind of preoccupation or fixation with a particular object of interest, like it becomes very a narrowed focus on like a source of pleasure and joy that comes at the expense of taking in other cues in their social world that may bring pleasure or joy. So it's not alone. It's just a little bit more pervasive. Yeah.
Other questions?
I'm Lisiane from Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, from the south. And I was interested on differential susceptibility in this field, because it might have, let's say, you might have individuals that are more plastic to the environment, and then they show more variability, and the others are less plastic, so it doesn't matter what happened. The stability will be there, and maybe they are mixed in the sample. And this is one of the, because I found it's a great topic in psychology to think about the differential genetic aspects of development. And I also, and another question, I'm not saving as Walter did. Another question is about the PhD students and postgrad students that have a more reduced environment and variability, I think. I think it's like a chronic stress under the same academic field. Yeah. And I found this very rich comparison, because although you have different areas of research, the task is basically the same for everybody all over the world for some reason or historical reason. And I think this is a laboratory for the follow-up of undergrads sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. And also the unique experiences you're saying that post-grad students have. There's a whole literature on graduate student mental health crisis, and that it may, in fact, be worse than we see in our undergraduate students, like 6 times the prevalence rates of the general population for their age group. I've been trying to get some funding to help study graduate students. It is challenging, more challenging than I would have thought, but I think it is a population we need to pay very careful attention to for their well-being. And as I say, we're all part of an interconnected ecosystem. When our grad students aren't doing well, that's affecting all of us too. So it's for them and for the whole ecosystem of your lab and community. So I do think it's something we need to pay a lot of attention to. I think you're right about that. Absolutely. And to support them in their time training and keep them as valuable members of our field, right? We lose them when they're not happy and suffering. So I agree. Thank you. Should I transition to Sabrina? You want to set up your slides while you? No, I think Oh, okay. I didn't know.
No?
Just wanted to.
Oh, one of that. Okay, so last question of this session, and then we go to the coffee break, and then we come back with Sabrina.
June, thank you
Hi.
so much for your talk.
Yeah, good to see you again.
I was wondering about, like, you said you study in mania, like cognitive behavior therapy. But I was seeing, I was seeing a lot of also strategies for emotion regulation in dialectic behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if these interventions are, I don't know, valuable in
Yeah.
any way to understand this kind of individual variability, but also like in terms of psychotherapy treatment and how we can intervene on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember learning DBT on my clinical internship, and one of the things I really loved about it was how it seemed to really translate the basic affective science into like working with people in a clinical context in few ways. Like you would see the process model of James Gross, like that you would be explaining to your clients. So it's like treating them like fellow scientists as well. I loved that piece of it. And I think it does have a lot of great efficacy. It's been applied to bipolar disorder. I mean, it's been applied transdiagnostically with a lot of promise. Is it perfect? No, but is it a step from CBT to like teach people strategies about regulating their emotions, mindfulness and acceptance, distress tolerance, like all these great skills? I think it just is one of the nicest ways I've seen translating science into practice, and it's shown some effectiveness. But it's not perfect, and I think we continue to have to refine the science to then inform the intervention. So I think it doesn't do as much with the positive emotion piece. If I'm honest, it builds a little bit of like building positivity, but without any boundary conditions, or like how do you help people who sometimes feel too excited, right? We think about that in mania. I also see it in kids. Like it's such a skill we try to teach kids of like, my kids are really excitable, so maybe I'm all biased, but we forget that that's still something we have to work on even as adults. So, yeah, great question. Thanks, Paolo.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jen, for joining us and for this brilliant talk. Thank you very much. So now we are moving. Let's go to have a coffee break. I think 15, 20 minutes, and then we come back for Sabrina's talk. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, guys, let's start our second session of this morning. And one of the nice things of this meeting is to have an interdisciplinary approach to rethinking the future. So we have philosophers, we have psychologists, we have neuroscience, we have musicians. Yeah, and now we are going to have another artist here. So Sabrina, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Sabrina is a great friend of mine, and as I said when I was introducing June, fourth time here in Brazil, and each time she comes here, it's awesome. All the time we are learning a lot and having different experiences that usually we don't have when doing science in a lab. So it's super cool. The last time, at the end of the week, after a week of discussing the science of happiness and creativity and arts, at the end of that week, the lab was full of beautiful drawings from all the students. And even I did one. I'm a bad artist, but I could. Yeah, I did it. And it was I proved it, yeah, and it was a great experience. In another time that Sabrina came here, we went to Pinacoteca with the students and with an eyeglass, and we start collecting data of people looking at the arts, and after we start discussing some projects that we could do using that technology in the link between psychology, neuroscience, and arts. It was so cool. So thank you again for coming. And I don't have many stories, but this we can talk after. Yeah, many funny facts that, yeah. They are transmitting at the YouTube, so let's keep it for the break, yeah. So Sabrina earned her BA in Visual Arts from Columbia University and her MFA in Painting and Printmaking from the Yale School of Art. Before teaching at Western Connecticut State University, she taught art course at UConn, Whittier College, and Connecticut College. Her current research involves some cross-cultural projects. One is this one I mentioned. We went to Alagoas to some quilombos. We visit, so Sabrina, Diane, myself, Sabrina, June, Diana, Tamir, myself, and some students here, including Ana Luisa and Ruth. She's sleeping. No, I'm kidding, yeah. And went to Alagoas and visited some quilombos, but it was just the January before the pandemic. So yeah, they almost get stuck here in Brazil. It was like a matter of some few weeks. And so she's part of this collaborative projects with many institutions and an interdisciplinary team. Her own artwork focuses on narrative, utilizing storytelling, memory, cultural commentary, and humor. As the daughter of a Cuban exile, her paintings are filled with stories of her family's experience during the Cuban Revolution. She has had solo and group exhibitions in New York City, as well as in other cities throughout the country. Sabrina has been an artist in residence and the Trellex residence in Switzerland, the Scuola Internazionale di Grafica in Italy, and the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation in Connecticut. She was selected for the Radius program at the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art and recently received a painting fellowship from the Connecticut Commission of the Arts. At Western Connecticut State University, she teaches various courses in undergraduate painting, and she's a graduate critic in the MFA program and is the director of the Katawari Honors Program. So welcome, Sabrina. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. A detail of that is, no, now.
Obrigado. Yeah. A detail, I passed the baton in being the director of the Katawari Honors Program as I am now in my sabbatical semester living, total supporter of the interdisciplinary art program, continue to be involved, but shifted that over to another professor. And here, rethinking the future of creativity. Thank you so much, Paulo, for inviting me to speak at this conference, and I look forward to further discussions about this topic, about rethinking the future of creativity. Will? We'll do a hand. To give you a sense, this is a photograph that I took. I took this photograph of my father. I was 19, going on 20 years old. He sustained a frontal lobe injury he was in New York City, and a metal clamp fell from a construction site and hit my father in the brain. And so, very life-changing experience. Life-changing in the sense is I was pre-med. I was at Columbia. That's why I went to Columbia. And in that point, I was taking an art class, and I said, I think I'm going to shift here, not fully understanding the why at the moment. There was like, at times in art, there's a colleague of mine that will say, you might know how it is, what it's about, but the why is not always understood at the time of its making, and this is related to artwork. I knew that I was asked to do portraiture. My father also needed a portrait of himself, and it was kind of titled by Henri Bergson, which talks about the decisive moment, a moment that exists in time that a photographer will take. It's not the moment before, it's not the moment afterwards. It's just it could be about even the way the light is striking the subject. And I share this because my interest in, and I had a lot of slides, but this was the photograph that really made it sing in many qualities. And my interest in the brain speaks from a personal point of view, one that I'm not a practitioner of it, but this was taken 25 years ago. And to bring you to date, this is the last time I was here in Sao Paulo. June and Paulo's students working in the lab, we created 3 working groups. And so this is some evidence of what we discussed in our 3 working groups, how there's a theoretical paper that a group was thinking about, conceiving of creativity and emotional process and well-being, and then the relationship with creativity and collaboration. And so to show, you might have seen this in Paulo's lab. This is an exercise that comes out of a book by Betty Edwards, which is it's titled Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain. And so she wrote it, I think it's in the 1980s, it might be even earlier than that. And so the exercise actually comes about where people are asked to make a drawing, to work on something, to think about the quality of the line, right? They're working, actually, I flipped this upside down here because that's how the activity unfolded. Paper is concealing what is being drawn. Why, you might ask? What is the purpose of this assignment, of this project? In many ways, what happens, and this is from Sir Ken Robinson, who speaks about, he wrote a book called Schools Kill Creativity. Now, do schools kill creativity? Is that something that's seen across different cultures? Is that something that, in Sir Ken Robinson, is he speaking about the American school education system? Because it's this thought that as children, when children are asked, are they creative? Can they draw? Is actually the specific question. They'll say, yeah, I draw, I'm drawing, I'm making drawings, I'm communicating. At a certain point, there is, and I've seen this in my classroom, I can't draw. And it's because I also taught in an interdisciplinary program, separate from the art program where students are majoring in art. I can't draw, that's something I can't do. And I will say to those students in the drawing class, well, of course you can't draw. If you're feeling that way, there wouldn't be an expectation in a French class, in a foreign language class, to say, I'm fluent in French, and you're taking French 101, right? This is a drawing 1 class. So we need some tools, right? Some vocabulary. And I'll say, drawing, art, and this is something I share with other colleagues in speaking about, that drawing is a language. It's a visual language. And so as society, there can be this, I can't do this. And it's kind of siloed away to those that are artists. And artists do that. Whereas what kind of benefit will it bring to people if they start to cultivate aspects, if it's about drawing and other ways of being creative? I'll even say take a line for a walk, and it's not necessarily with a graphite or an ink pencil. It could be with string, right? And then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm quasi-knitting. I'm making something. I'm weaving something. And just the act of haptic exercises and working physically, how that can make a difference in how people are feeling that felt experience. So this was coming out of this idea of I can't draw. Well, let's see what happens. Let's try this. And so this is actually a student's then result of the act of doing this assignment, where it gets really complicated when, if it's actually done right side up, go into symbolism, going into looking at hands, face, that can be very intimidating. So when it's actually just see the quality of the line, focus and take it down, this kind of mapping your way down the paper, suddenly there's a shift that occurs that we were seeing in the group population that did the assignment, right? And so I become really curious about what can we learn from the integration about how can creativity be incorporated when collaborated and one's well-being, right? When creativity and emotional process and well-being, June was talking about with the students about body mapping different emotions linked to emotional diversity and creativity. So these are just with the bullet points, the sense of where can we go from here in understanding more about creativity and its link to emotion, well-being, happiness, and that's what we were focusing on. So then when I gave a talk, and it was actually in June's Is Your class in the spring, I was then thinking about like, okay, so how do we think about cultivating creativity? And so a space to cultivate creativity. This is a professional artist, Micheline Thomas. She has a large space. She's working and she's finding different ways of engaging in her art making. What I will say is like when we went into lockdown during COVID-19, it was the first assignment, the homework for my students was you need to carve out a space that you can make work in, because when you can consider it a flex space, but there's a lot of benefit from it being a dedicated space. Those sorts of transitions in getting into creative making can be problematic. We can get distracted. There's even this idea of like, bring a potted plant. Maybe bring a plant to your studio, because even if you're not gonna go and work there, you might need to water your plant, and that just kind of, these little tricks that kind of bring you in to a creative making. So, because there's this idea where, and I can't remember at this point, this artist that said if you don't start working in the first 15 minutes, you're not necessarily gonna be working, right? So just kind of get to work, get yourself in a state of, even if you don't know what you're making, just start working it out. So in showing you some different art studios, the way where a studio-like environment is something that is really important to cultivating for professional artists, a space that's separate, like I was saying that Micheline has, a space that's separate for your work. So if you're working and you want to work tabletop, you have a desk. If you want to work on the floor, if there's something about, having, would it be great to have wall space, or you decide that you want to go out to a park. And then I brought this as a model, because this came out of this idea where this is a portable kind of space, right? So it's an object, it functions both as a space and an object. And in doing so, this idea where the end is not known in sight, but there are parameters, there are kind of, let's say, call them rules. There's color will be used, it is easily accessible materials, there are, I would say, in its abstraction, it has to cross the boundaries of the paper. You have to use the whole paper. And this is a project that came out of in the month of June after speaking in June's class and seeing that there's this gratitude journal that I think it was all semester that her students worked on this. It was trying to think about how a visual journal, I can go through this, but how a visual journal, which I actually never quite did. I had sketchbooks and I would kind of pick them up and leave them. They served a certain kind of purpose, but this sustained, dedicated time of working is something that I'm going to have, and hold on, here we go. You can do that. Thank you. Thank you. So, this was actually a drawing that was done by my 9-year-old daughter at the time. She didn't realize this was a dedicated space for me to work on this project that I thought of after June's class. And I went, wait a second, actually, let me think about it. And there's kind of a lingo, this idea of a happy accident in art making, where there can be in a preliminary drawing class, there's a desire to erase, a desire that there's a right and a wrong way to express if you're drawing a still life, right? And so the idea that, well, no, let's think about with the quality of the line and what you're drawing, let it be like a palimpsest, a experience of an experience over a period of time. That's giving you information rather than thinking there's a right and wrong way of articulating what you're seeing in front of you. At a certain point, yes, you can get into a state of criteria that you've determined that you want it to look a certain way, but there's many ways that we can roadblock ourselves to express. And so if we start to decide what are our ideas of the criteria of our judgment, because a lot of times the criteria of judgment can come from outside of ourselves, if there's a way where we're working and just saying, this is a kind of idea of, this was waiting at a train station going, oh my God, my husband got us there like 3 hours early in Florence and Venice, and I was like, maybe 45 minutes, there was no chairs, you're sitting on the floor, but he was, had some concern about making the train. And so it was a really, and how going to the quilombolas, seeing that when interviewing the matriarch group and saying, oh, so much of our tradition is being lost, so much is occurring where the oral tradition is being taken, the phone essentially is hijacking this connection and sense of storytelling that's being passed on generation from generation. What can we do to address that? And these sorts of things was just getting into this state of thinking about nonverbal ways to also to express, right? There's idea that art making, visual art making, can be in a worthwhile attempt to express the ineffable, that which we can't put words to. At times we can, definitely what we can put words to when things are drawn and they are realistic. You're trying to do an illusionistic translation where it's a realistic image. But when it's about color, texture, your relationship to the paper, what you're going through I think it's the idea of also a time of waiting when we see so many people waiting in lines and scrolling on their phone. This is my call to action to think about, can we have something portable where because there's this idea of use a coloring book and fill in the coloring book. Well, that's been defined by somebody else. And what is your then investment from the origin, from the onset, that you are making decisions from the get-go? That could be a nice invitation, color in a tree that's in and can be make you feel good, could potentially do that. And I'm thinking about how there is a way where going from one page to the next, this is kind of a pilot program here for myself to think about going from one page to the next. When is it done? It's not necessarily linear. I'll go back into the book. Not everything has been said in one piece of paper. I feel like it's itching. I need to continue saying what hasn't been fully said. And so that's where color, line, and texture pattern, this is during, I was in quarantine during COVID, not COVID, I had COVID with my daughter. And so we just laid in bed for days, and I just pulled the book out. But I will say, this is a large-size sketchbook, but thinking with the book that we have here, and we'll do a slightly different exercise, what can be a felt experience from this? So I'm almost done here. This is actually on part of my trip to Sao Paulo when I woke up off the plane, in kind of crammed spaces. Thank you, that was helpful. So an idea about making that might be something that can be tied to a sustained period of time, where I have here an artist that is making a painting about, and this is the topic that I wanted to bring up as well, about the idea of the mundane, the everyday. In your everyday life, she's depicting two people, potentially her parents, as they're at the breakfast table. And in making multiple paintings, not saying, you can say the same thing slightly differently over a period of works, right? And so in the back in the window, there is the mountainside, the sublime, they're out west, and how certain artists will choose their subject matters and they'll speak about the sublime visually. Other people, they're interested in what they've had for breakfast, and that's what they'll depict. And it can be a visual journal, a diary in a way. So I think putting language to what you decide you want to make work about is very particular. It's very idiosyncratic, very customized to you and what you need to make work about. Because as I work with my students, I'll say, you're bringing your own cultural heritage, your own experience here. You're not just starting from scratch. So what can you bring to your art making, to this journey that you're going to take that potentially exists in the 15 weeks of the semester, if that's what you choose, because you're in the class. But how can that leave the classroom walls and into your life to continue to cultivate creativity in your life? To tie back to the idea that when I'm speaking about this kind of call to action, this idea of schools killing creativity, what starts to happen? It becomes an elective class, something where it's beside the requirements that are taken in math, science, and other courses, which are super important to take, but what are we losing? What is it at the expense of? And so trying to reintroduce that to beyond students making portfolio work, this group of students, what is the critique process? We can have that in our other disciplines where we are critiquing each other's work, giving each other feedback. At a certain point when students are making work, feedback is not necessarily helpful. Like there is a point where it's like in getting into a flow state of working with creativity, it's like the critic needs to step outside, because having so many critic voices can actually stifle the creative process, is what gets discussed a lot. Or it's like other voices are then getting in the way. There's a certain point at which feedback is important, but is it, that I become really curious about at what point is feedback important, right? Is it when it's a dedicated, we pin up the work on the wall, or it's on the floor and we start discussing it? Is that at a point where it's a one-on-one and it's a bit more intimate, whether it's with your fellow classmate that you trust, there's a level of trust that starts to unfold that is important? Or is it your mentor, your faculty member, and they're giving you that one-on-one feedback? Because when I'm saying it can get overwhelming or it can be too much, there's just a state of a sustained period of time of making that needs to occur. And usually it can be like 1 to 3 hours is very helpful. A work day is amazing, having 8 hours of making work. But thinking about how much time do I spend thinking about what others think of me? So I tried to take slides of artists while they were working or in their studio spaces that Jean-Michel Basquiat shared. So he's a painter. I'm not sure if you know about him from in the 80s. You might see kind of images of Basquiat working or Basquiat's work. I don't think about art or art critics when I'm working. I try to think about life. So it's not to say we ignore the importance of the critic, we ignore what our peers are saying, but there's something about what your relationship to life and making that then you're also collaborating with, you're thinking about, so that the making can happen. I really believe I've seen that happen here. Here, I was just hoping it works. Here is, what is creativity to me? So I'm asking you to answer that question, to get into the URL of that. And to please type your answer into that. It's okay. So yes. So as you're working out, I see a lot of written responses. What I'd like to invite you to do, because it's different, right? What we read and what we're seeing of what is creativity to me and answering that is also, I'd like to invite at least, I would say 3 people to share what they wrote so we can hear it, because it's different than reading it. Fernanda?
I actually wrote 3 things. I wrote, oh, now it's all lost in the doc, but I wrote happiness, expression, and wait, there was something else, which was the first thing I thought of. Freedom, yeah, that's it.
I wrote it's like going on a highway, and it doesn't matter the speed that you're in, and you may be absorbing and producing things that you see on the outside and that it's within you as well. That's how I feel the spectrum of creativity.
Great. One other person? Eh?
I've said that creativity is making something new with your previous knowledge.
Yes, I've heard a jazz musician speak about creativity is not something that comes from nothing. It comes from, improvisation occurs from, my jazz music comes from something. I don't start from nothing. And so I think thank you for all for sharing. The part of actually what can be really daunting is the blank piece of paper. It's the white canvas. It starts from nothing. And that's when I was encouraging, thinking about how you can bring your own background, your cultural heritage. There's a course I once taught that I'll be teaching again with an anthropologist titled, There's No Place Like Home, and how in autoethnography and in students working with their own art making, how can we make work, non-artists, right? Make work about our identity, ourselves, our relationship to memory, to saudade, to immigration, to moving, to home insecurity, to nomadic lifestyle, that we're looking outward at different populations, right? We're reading, we're learning a lot from the anthropologist that co-teaches this course, and I'm coming in and also working and saying, what kind of material can we use to inspire, to cultivate this kind of way of creating connection to ourselves and to others as we're trying to understand about their experience. And so Paulo is going to be doing, what is it technically though? A word cloud. He's working on a word cloud. And so that's later. But that's something that in seeing that, is there a pattern? Is there in taking the information about what people are saying, what creativity is, looking at that a little bit later. And so with intuitive hunches, so certain things also about, when Paulo, June, and I spoke about creativity, Paulo really had a great talk about also the ideas of with the science of creativity, the myths that kind of exist with creativity, how we can think about how to dispel certain myths. It has intuitive hunches, thinking about, is there something about in the creative process that we can look to intuition to be a guiding light when working? Picasso says, I don't have a clue. Ideas are simply starting points. I can really set them down as they come into my mind. As soon as I start to work, others well up in my pen. To know what you're going to draw, you have to begin drawing. When I find myself facing a blank page, that is always going through my head. What I capture in spite of myself interests me more than my own ideas. And so there's a beautiful documentary, actually, of Picasso making work late in his life. He might have even been verging in his 90s. It's considered one of the first documentaries of an artist. And for the purposes of the making, you see these drawings unfold as he's working. The part of the project that he agreed to when this filmmaker was making work about him was that it was going to be a certain kind of ink that he'd work. You'd see it through behind the piece of paper he was working, so you were seeing in real time, and how there are all these transformations that occur that we'll do something related to that with transformation, and that after the documentary was made, he destroyed the work. The work was for the purposes of the documentation, right? The documentary, and how there's 3 different ways to watch it. It's with just it's essentially a silent film other than you're hearing the material being on the paper to him speaking at a certain point. That's one way to watch it. Another way to watch it is hearing it with music. So the documentary has that option. The third is hearing an art critic speak. If it's not Rosalind Krauss, but it's another known art critic that's speaking at the time of the making as it's happening. And so thinking about aesthetic experience or art making experience of watching something unfold, not in real time in the sense that the documentary was made a long time ago, but in a time of its making. And what experience do you have when seeing that about Picasso? I mean, he did say that it took him maybe a few years to learn to draw like a draftsman, and let's say like an amazing drawer. It took him a whole lifetime to learn to connect back to draw like a child. And so where is that? I think that's an interesting relationship that he has to art making as well. That could maybe fit into thinking about creativity. Is there something about hearkening back to childhood, a place where it can be really challenging when if you've not made work since you've been a child, to think about how your intellectual growth has surpassed your potentially with making visual forms, you can feel like there might be a learning curve, something that might need to catch up, because it can be quite frustrating and going like, this looks like a child could make it better than I could. I've heard that a lot as well. So that's where even in sharing this book, that I don't make work like that. This is very separate from, this is a side, let's call it a side project that's taken a real importance at this point of thinking about shapes, color, texture, form, the everyday, the diaristic, inspired by hearing about how that can inform being a sense of like, oh, I'm so grateful for these colors, these shapes, I don't know where I'm going, kind of way of working, and it'd be helpful to think about then writing in, journaling, what was the felt experience from that? Haven't done that. So a myth, a kind of relationship of where does inspiration fit into creativity. Somerset Maugham is a writer, and he says, I write only when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. This is something in the grad program we'll say to our students, because they're like, at times I didn't feel like working. We're like, I know you didn't feel like working. It doesn't always, going to the studio isn't always when it's the aha moments. It comes, a lot of inspiration can come out of the work. But in many ways, creativity can be thought about that I'm only going to be working in a space to be creative when I feel inspired. And so this relationship of having a diverse set of emotions while working, and working in only when inspiration is there, can be a real problematic way towards making work that can then feel fulfilling. So I think that is something that we talk about a lot in the art education domain. I wanted to share this because this also, in collaboration, has anybody heard of Gee's Bend quilts or the Gee's Bend area? So it's in the area of Alabama in the United States, the south of the country of the United States. And in the early 1800s, when Gee's comes from a man named Joseph Gee, he came over to Alabama, and with him he brought 18 slaves from Africa. And this area of Gee's Bend in Alabama was surrounded by three in the Alabama River, and so it's quite isolated. So what it has shown since the early 1900s, because when emancipation occurred, the people who were slaves and the descendants were given land. They were able to stay in this area if they chose to. And what came about is that this population has continued. It's quite isolated because of geography, and it became considered one of the most impoverished places in the United States. Around in the 1930s, people had borrowed money from Bend, Gies, who had sold land to somebody else. In the end, I'm speaking about this, giving you kind of some context related to why these quilts occurred. Why did these quilts occur? Is that their whole property, everything that they had was looted because they said, the man who had the property said, you owe me. Yes, you have this land, but I lent you all this money. I'm taking everything from you. And so they started to use scraps of fabric with clothing. They were archiving their life. They were narrating and rewriting their lives through quilt making. They did it from a necessity. So with creativity, this sense of, is there a need for a usefulness? It served a purpose. They were cold, there was no heat. And so there was another material that they used, feed sacks. And so in the intersection of feed, which is like food for their animals, their livestock, using the feed stacks, the clothing, different kinds of scraps of fabric, they started to work on these quilts. And what starts to happen is they start to deviate from traditional quilt making. They learn from quilt making from their descendants in Africa and started to make these works that in their abstractions it's come to be really profitable, but that wasn't the intention. The intention was its utilitarian purpose, and then this beauty came about. They became interested in, I think from the onset, of making them aesthetically appealing. So thinking about working with a group of people together, there is, I guess it's almost now verging on 100 years, thinking about when we were in our third working group about creativity and collaboration. Has this 100 years of working and this tradition being passed down by descendants, how is that informing the relationship to creativity? And the relationship to community, this is actually, she is not here. Is Deborah here? Deborah, you inspired the slide. So Deborah last night was speaking about at Duke University, it's on a Sunday I'm not sure how many times, how frequently it occurs, if it's every Sunday, but she was sharing with me that there is a space, and it's a space that I think all universities could model themselves off of Duke's purpose of a space where I would say it's like a invitation if you're working on a project, and it has this interdisciplinarity of, it could be that you're working on an art project or you're working on, actually, I would prefer Deborah to speak about this because I think it really, firsthand.
Yeah, so it's a space at Duke actually that is kind of open for anybody to just join. Like if you have a film project, if you have like scrapbooking, if you want to make a game, if you have code, you can just go there, present your project, have people join. Or you can just go there and join a project that is ongoing. It's kind of like open for anybody to collaborate, interdisciplinary. Yep.
I love that because it has happened a little bit, in the university setting that I'm in, it gets discussed as an idea. Like, wouldn't that be great if we did this, ... nothing happens, let's say. That's a hyperbole, that's an exaggeration. Not that nothing happens, but that a period of sustained time, imagine that occurring over a decade of time. What kind of hub of working with minds that are very different in different disciplines, how would that inform creativity? Right? This is a community of people computer scientists, biologists, a writer, and I would say a nursing student. And so they are working on an interaction of color exercise, an exercise that the students in Paulo's lab worked on, where it was the difference between the physical facts of color are different than their psychic effect. Okay, that's a theory, that's an idea. What Joseph Albers, who coined this idea of the interaction of color, is leap before you look. Experience before theory. He really believed in this. Let's work on these projects before we can start. Not that you can't theorize before doing, but maybe there is something about let's not discuss, let's not put so much language to the experience, and then speak about the experience after and seeing what maybe you get further creativity-wise, while not in that part of when I was saying the critic occurs, but maybe the point at which the critique occurs, the timing of it has the impact that it has. So we have time. We're going to do two different things. We're going to do this, which is the word spinner exercise. And what, you all have a pen? Do you have a pen? I have a piece of paper? Because we have paper and we have pen, if you don't have. And so as you pull out your paper, you have your pen. Pen. Aquí. We can use pens first, yeah. And then we'll do this later. Yeah. So this word spinner exercise, having you relate to in surrealists, so in surrealism, there was a time period in art history where it was a real embrace towards automatic writing, automatic drawing, and this ways of, if they were connecting to Jungian ideas of art and the unconscious, it's this way of, let's just, in doing the word spinner exercise, think about, make a list of 16 words that you find interesting, you find meaning in. You can decide, you can set your criteria that you find meaning in it right now. You found meaning in it in your past, in your childhood. That you can set up, there's some creative license there, right, to discuss that. I did say cut out a circular piece of paper, though what we decided, that's a little too complicated with this morning. Just rectangle's great. Rectangle's great. Let's do. It's a beautiful geometric form, so let's keep it at the rectangle. Just loving circles and related to the image by, actually she's Brazilian, Beatriz Milhares. I think anyone know her work? I don't know if her work is in the Pinacoteca, but I'll look it up. And so in writing around, what I'd like you to do is write around the perimeter. I use my hands a lot, is what I realized. My PowerPoint. So write the words around, yeah? And you can just put a number underneath the word, right? So numbering the word numerically. You can decide, you can actually map it in such a way that it's not linear, or it is. Suits what suits you. Yeah, at times with my students in drawing, we'll say the drawing doesn't have to be linear. You can think about it like you're the conductor with the music happening and the strings are occurring and then the percussion is occurring. And so you map out, you actually write the numbers on the piece of paper and you start bringing the drawing together, synthesizing it in a different way. And the surrealists were very interested in divergent thinking, what typically occurs in spontaneous, free-flowing manner, where multiple creative ideas are generated in a short order, unexpected connections are drawn, judgment is suspended or minimized until later, right? It occurs, but later. And if the spinner, I see Walter has had success with the spinner. If the spinner is physically problematic because of how we're oriented, how we're sitting, you could always. June gave me this idea too. You could always put the pen and spin it, like how to spin a bottle. How to spin a bottle didn't work for me. Didn't work for me. You could spin it, and where the pen lands, those are your three. Do it 3 times. While you're writing, we just have to unplug for a sec. Yeah, she has it.
Oi? Ah, não, não, tá tudo bem. A gente só tá mudando a tela. Obrigado.
Yeah, and now if we can do a portion of the sharing of what was written, and I'll say the surrealists would talk about working with a great deal of uncertainty, or artists will speak about this. It's, with creativity, working with under a great deal of uncertainty, ambiguity, and knowing that these three words, how to then make it, where's the connection being made? So thinking about it's sensical, nonsensical, there is no right or wrong way to have done this exercise other than the spinning it and the things that were asked of you up front. Right? Volunteers to share? Yeah.
So I had 3 words: beach, rest, and rhythm. And I wrote, I rest my feet and walk gently across the beach, dancing freely back and forth to the rhythm of the sea.
Nice. Walter.
So my 3 words were addition, soup, and bag. And my poem is, the addition of soup to my bag produces a goop to be cleaned by a rag that I rub in a loop or a tail's wag so I can store jamboo and won't gag.
Oh, man.
Bravo. Jude?
Mine's more kind of continuing on the ocean theme. My words were fog, tea, and then motherhood. So the deep, heavy fog slowly lifted as she sat quietly on the bluffs, overlooking the still and yet moving sea and reflecting on motherhood. I grew up near the ocean, so yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So my words were feed, honor, pardon me, and wanderlust. So it's truly meaningless how many times I've tried feeding myself. That's why I could no longer be negligent of honor myself to be a man consumed by wanderlust.
Fernanda.
I'd like to share, but I wrote it in Portuguese because I think it sounds really cool. But I can translate it later. So my words were sorriso, smile, infinito, infinity, and love. So this is what I wrote. Quem diria que algum dia eu encontraria amor tão, tão bonito, pedaço do infinito, guardado num sorriso de alguém que posso chamar de meu. Parece que a sorte me escolheu. It's really cheesy, I'm sorry. But it says, who would say that someday I would find a love so, so beautiful, a piece of infinity that's, I don't know, kept in a smile of someone that I can call mine. Looks like luck has chosen me.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Okay, so my words were change, discovery, and dialogue. And I wrote, the open door to change is an inside discovery that expands to the outside. But the door itself has no handle on the disposition of others. It only can be a dialogue.
I made a haiku because my words were housewarming, seeds, and cruciferous. So mine is housewarming parties with cruciferous snack trays, plant seeds of friendship. It's very cheesy.
But bad, good, bad. Yeah.
Mine's not nearly as serious or as good as you guys. My words were Brad Pitt, axolotl, and Swedish fish. So my short little thing is Brad Pitt once ate an axolotl, which is like a Mexican salamander. He preferred it to Swedish fish. What a man.
You know, I actually think this part of not right and wrong, when you're like, it's bad, and how we qualify, I mean, go Brad Pitt, go Paul. Yeah, it is something that in leading this exercise, there's been I'll call it, it's not a constraint, because it's good, parameters, traction, rules. One has been to do it in a haiku form, right? And then it's opened it up that it's not a haiku form, but he's seeing that a haiku arrives through the act of making it. And I will say that Paulo did the exercise as well. He followed the instructions.
Yeah, I followed.
Yeah, you did. You followed the instructions.
Okay. So I follow the instructions. And there's a cheating thing here. So the words are, let me find here. So dream, ocean, and eternity. Dreams set sail on the ocean's tide, where eternity and waves coincide. Boundless depths where hopes confide. In the dance of time, dreams never hide. Yeah, so that is it. But look at that. I cheated. Yeah, what I did was, I entered in Chat GPT. Look at that. And I gave him the instructions. Select 16 meaningful words for you, then randomly select 3 and write a poem. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool, look at that.
Very creative. Well, thinking about this, what it brings to mind, and I've spoken about this, is, well, people will say in art making, you know, what is cheating? What is when using a tool, at what point, and I don't know, I can't speak to the research, there's research with Jet. I can't even say her name, or its name, Chat, GBQ, T. Yeah, there.
Yeah.
You said it. And I will get it. It's too much of a jumble of letters at the moment. But I will say that in Velázquez was known, a painter, European painter, was known for a certain research was done by another painter that, and I'm sure conservators and conservation scientists have worked on this, but that it's believed that he used the camera obscura before the camera, actual physical camera existed. Why? Because he was saying, David Hockney, who wrote about Velázquez, was saying that it was just way beyond complication. He was doing portrait paintings with these velvet, complicated patterns. And so does it make Velázquez any less or more creative to have used a tool to execute the painting? It gets brought up, it gets questioned, so I wonder, does it make Paulo any more or less creative to have used his friend, Chat BT? Close friend, your close friend. Does it, did it make a sense that you're collaborating? These questions that get brought up, is it gonna be the end and death of art if AI becomes incorporated? It has polarizing answers at this point. What we do have some answers about is the question that you were asked earlier.
Which one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so here we have 2 word clouds. Which one do you think was based on your answers, on your responses? First or the second? First? Yeah, you're right. The second one is ChatGPT. So I asked him some definitions on what he thinks about creativity, just to check and compare with our answers here. and it's in this case it's pretty clear which one is the one.
How do you know it's a he?
It's what?
I called it a she.
I call. Yeah, it depends on my mood. Sometimes yeah.
Thank you, and thank you, Paulo, for doing that. Thank you, everyone, for participating in some of these exercises that or in all the exercises that we've been doing. Do we have time? No time. One more? One more? Okay, because there's one more. One more. So you have your paper. Now we're going to use some color. Let's see what color we were writing. Now we're going to do something visual. And it's going to be handed out, getting 2 different colors to people. You're going to use your piece of paper. So in the time that we have a blank piece of paper, have nothing else on it at the moment, and I want you it's this idea of taking a line for a walk, make a squiggle, everybody, right? Squiggle your line. A squiggle in English, maybe in Portuguese, a squiggle, uma linha como orgânica. A happy what? Happy school. Happy school. Happy school. Yeah, with nothing else on the paper. Oh, you were doing it. Just one color, thank you. You're only using one color at the moment. One color, squiggle the line. Any line? Should it be on the blank sheet? Yeah, blank. That's what I was saying. Blank sheet, new sheet, possibly. Nothing else is on it. The paper horizontally, vertically of your choosing. Sabrina. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I have more. Yeah? Yeah. I need one. Maybe the silicon. Has everyone squiggled? Yeah? Okay, I have my squiggle. What you need to do is now exchange your squiggle with somebody else. Yeah? Please. You got a squiggle? Yeah. Anybody missing a squiggle? Like they didn't get to exchange because we might not have an even number of people? Because I can change it with them. Did you change? You want to change? Did you change? Yeah. Have you changed? Yeah. Okay. Anybody need a squiggle friend? No? Okay. So now I want you to take what you have in front of you and make a picture out of it. Okay? Yeah, and you can use, because you'll have a different color, right? Yeah, different color, yeah. Make it as messy as you like. You don't have to keep the same lines. You can add bits or scribble bits out of it. But the key is to try and to transform it into a picture or something that is meaningful as opposed to an incomprehensible squiggle, right? It's not meta. It's not squiggles about squiggles, but you're trying to transform it. You may, yeah. You use both colors. You have two colors, right? And so now there actually becomes 3 colors. Yeah.
Draw a line for me to make one.
Yes, I'll do that.
Try. Use any color?
2 colors.
Okay.
Because then that's different.
Okay.
Maybe another minute. I would love, and I don't think we have any form of, do we have, Ana Luisa, any form of putting it up on a wall? Because we have that, like, do we have tape? Or the ledge, is there a little ledge on, is there a ledge there? Do I have tape? I thought I brought tape. Yeah, what do you think? Like that wall, maybe? That wall. Yeah, so if you're done, if you put the image on the wall, Ana Luisa has little stickers. Oh, yes, and yeah, art supplies, you know they're precious. Yeah. When you put it up, bringing both of the markers, yes. Markers. Yeah, you get awesome. Markers. Which one is that? Do you have the? Can you put the tap on that? Yeah. Thank you. I'll have blue hands. I won't be able to. Maybe. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. What is your name? Luca. Thank you. So you'll see Luca is volunteered to help to take markers as well. There's Luca. Luca. You can make another tier, putting the images on top now, another row on top, so we create almost a grid of image. Obrigada. As it's being finished being put up on the wall, part of sharing of a bit about what the experience was like to do this exercise.
It was fun. Like I had almost a straight line, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I just transformed it into a landscape. So it was fun.
You're fun. Someone else? Oops. Yeah.
I had this half round form, then with symbol of the infinite, and I thought that this could be eyes, and I made I thought of Salvador Dali, of making a surrealist face.
Yeah, thinking about Salvador Dali, there can be the melting clock, the face, the surrealist. It is something that gets asked about. You pass the paper on to somebody else, so the start of the work was initiated by somebody else, not you, and in a response to making the piece go from perhaps I'm putting quotes in it, but a meaningless squiggle to a meaningful image, and what happens there, and what can be said about the experience, the process of doing that. And the other part was speaking about fun. And I think that trying to even measure the level of fun, but it is, as not being a scientist, right? But this idea of fun, talks about with the creative process. Paulo spoke about that too, where people will think at times, and enjoyment is part of it. Their students will talk about at times, I don't want to work because it's not fun. And so to what degree does it need to be engaging and exciting or fun or stimulating in some way that activates that part of, this was more of a game, right? And to when it is grueling, Paulo would talk about self-reporting of artists. I was saying it was painful to make the work, yet it was also fulfilling. And so this relationship to the creative process would be interesting for me to learn more about. The last, with trying to bring up discussion questions. How can psychology and neuroscience inform our understanding of creativity? What happens when we include the richness of context, history, and community into our study of creativity? How can we expand our love of creativity to connect to more inclusive stories and a broader vision of the future of humanity? So thinking, these are questions I think about, questions I don't have full answers to, right? That is something. So I thank you for working with me today in these experiential exercises, and I look forward to further discussions with you all. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sabrina. It was awesome, as always. Thank you very much. So now it's open for questions. Anyone would like to?
It's actually more of a comment on your second question. What you were saying actually made me think a lot about heritage and how we include like our past life, like our experiences into the work we do. And this actually reminded me of Elisa's talk on Tuesday, yeah? She talked a lot about how we should embrace other cultures and respect them as real knowledge, because we're used to only considering knowledge what Western cultures do and stuff. So I don't know, it just made me think about that and how cool it is to respect our own history, our own context and heritage when we're doing work. And I don't know, it just made me think a lot about that, so I just wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. Walter, yeah?
So I think you cheated us. You had us have to say what we think creativity is, and now I want you to answer the question.
Do you think I skirted that, Walter? Well, I can say that was very hard for me to answer when I was writing a syllabus for a course that I co-taught with a Tibetan Buddhist Lama, where I think I mentioned it in the talk, where it was the art of creativity, cultivating happiness and meaning. And then a colleague of mine said, well, what is creativity? And I went, and I couldn't put words to it. And so then I started going, well, originality of an idea, it's useful. Well, useful to who? Is it useful to me? It's useful to us? And it really brought up, I still don't feel like I fully understand what creativity is. I don't. And I can say it's like in reading Wired to Create and Unraveling the Mysteries of the Creative Mind, there's a book by Carolyn Gregoire and Scott Barry Kaufman, who wrote a book about this. And so it's kind of creating this, for lack of a better phrase at this point, recipe, but this idea of like existing in a state of ambiguity, sustained period, being kind of finding it's uncomfortable, but kind of existing within it and working through that. And serious playfulness, so having these exercises that get us into a state of like, are we playing? Is it bringing you back to childhood? Or bringing me back to childhood? Or is it quite not, because we're not children, but is it accessing a part of us that we put aside for, that was really prioritized? Not to say it does not exist, that it's absent. But I do think that there is this, when speaking, and it was, he's not there at the moment, originality of an idea, but he goes, oh, it's based on something. So does it need to be original? I don't think I believe that. Right? It's when I was showing the painting of Zoe Franken, she keeps working on an idea, and she's interested in about time, color, light, and she's working observationally. I think that word original puts a lot of pressure on what a creative experience can be like, so.
I love it. I think science is a lot to do with creativity, and I approach entrepreneurship groups in my university, and they play with active teaching methods, and then I also try to apply active teaching methods to my students as well, because I think it brings a lot of tools for us to understand better our field, and well, actually every field, because it brings the human side to it. And at the same time, how can we explain science? I think science is the same problem as creativity. It's very difficult to explain how we do that, because it requires, I don't know, a method or a way of thinking, but it's also divergent thinking in the same way as creativity. So I find the two fields very close together, and I think they can improve. I search for divergent thinking, because this is the way we can evolve in science. If we do always the same thing, then it's like, I don't know, boring in the first time. And second is how can we move around the existing ideas and then like spinning over them and then bringing new knowledge and base it on the actual problems of every day. So I think it's the same approach as creativity.
Yeah, well, thank you. There's actually with social emotional, there's been a push towards social emotional learning in in the United States with elementary education, and it's something in thinking about, well, where is that kind of idea of creative education, art education, pedagogy. As I said earlier, it's considered an elective. It's a choice. You can, maybe you'll take it once a week. And that's, I think that's, at least it's once a week. In some schools, it's non-existent. In others, it gets eliminated because there's no time for that. But what a loss in many ways. Oh, you had something? Oh, here.
Hi, I was wondering, because you said about like the criticism and the techniques, and I have a friend that she does arts, and she has said to me sometimes that sometimes she sees her students and her colleagues doing art, but not knowing what they're doing, or just trying to put something on the paper. So how do you deal to equalize like critics for just creativity? What do you tell your students to is there a blank pen paper to do those things, and how to criticize that too, with your students?
Right. So in a way, is it open-ended, or is it?
Yeah, it's like an open-ended, or
right.
Like they have to do something, or they have to do a meaning to something like.
Yeah, so I think in learning tools about making visual art, it's really important. I believe in this. I work with people that believe in this, to learn the tools of engagement, of value scale, of drawing, of trying to translate a three-dimensional information onto a two-dimensional surface. That is illusion. You're trying to learn tools of illusionistic expression. And so then from there are, at a certain point when you were saying it can get, with science, when you were speaking about it can get boring, what I have experienced with students, and so there can be really different schools of thought where it's like, you need to do that technique for 10 years before you can start to creatively express. I don't believe that. I think that expression needs to come in pretty soon as those tools are evolving, that are being learned, because then it's, yeah, what am I going to creatively express? I'm looking at a still life that's very important. It's been painted white, so we're addressing it at a gray scale, and so we're creating really strict parameters. But then it's like, what do you want to make work about? And so there's also, that takes time. That can take 10 years at least, right, to start to have that unfold. So at times it's like, technique has to catch up to the expression of the creative expression, and at other times it's like, oh, you can really draw. You can make work about anything you see. What do you want to make work about? And it's, I guess I can make work about what you tell me to make work about. It's like it's been prescribed to me. So it's a delicate, there's a balance.
Yeah. My friend just said that she sees a lot of like people doing work but not knowing what they're doing and just doing because they were asked to for like the classes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is all really just fascinating, right? Just the study of creativity in itself, and I see so many similarities of what happens in your world with what happens in mine. I would like for you to talk a little bit about the critique process, because we engage with art making the same way that, here we go, I'm like the eco chato, I'm the diversity chato. Just because in music, for example, everything that we do is very much similar to the apprentice model, right? So you have somebody who knows more than you, and you interact with that person, and there is actually a lot of questioning about the critique process. You suggested like a community process that perhaps is a lot more inclusive, but I'm just considering thinking about the more artistic one that we sometimes have the ability to destroy person, right, in the way that we are approaching the art. And how are you engaging? What are some ideas for a more inclusive way of talking about someone's art, respecting it? And I know you model that because you're doing right by this, but sometimes in an artwork and engaging with more with art, you're giving us a lot of freedom and a lot of forgiveness. Yeah. We are not in an artists in that sense. But if we were, the exchange of the technique and the creativity, while you cannot do that because of this, or this art is not very good. In piano, I was a pianist. One of the things that happened a lot was for a student to leave a studio crying, right? So you performed and you rehearsed and you come in, and that, the American Got Talent, that publicity of criticism that can destroy the human. So I'm just curious about some more ways to approach the critique process in a way that we are inclusive, respectful, and maybe some research or ideas that you have.
Oh, I love this because there's a relationship to, are you making work for yourself? Or are you making work for the viewer? The idea that this work will then be shared with others. And I think that critique is a different kind of critique. And in this collective inclusive approach that I tried to take is one because I did experience as a grad student people crying, people feeling like they have been completely destroyed, deflated, and going, okay, I guess, this model of tear you down so you build yourself up and you'll be stronger. And that's an approach, that's a model that some people take. And in asking, when that idea that what do you bring to the artwork, there's criteria. So there's demands of, are you going to translate this and it look illusionistically like what was set out to occur? There's then that criteria of technique that gets discussed. When it is about a student, sometimes the approach is, tell us what your work is about in a grad setting, right? The student will say this work is about X, Y, and Z. And we'll look at it and go, that's really not being communicated. And then we start to say, okay, this is not what's happening. And is that helpful? Or we can then say, this is what we see that is happening in the work. And so there's two different kinds of approaches to that, and how to help them then. Is it the scale? They want it to be epic, and they're working at a very small scale. So do they then need to make it bigger than themselves? And that kind of feedback of it being a collaboration. We hear you saying this, and then this kind of idea of, there is a mentorship, apprenticeship model, but it does have a quality of, well, we hear you saying something, and these what ifs start to happen, and outside of the perspective of oneself is very helpful in a group setting. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sabrina, for all the things that you exposed us today. So I was thinking on my high school, I had like different classes for different kind of students. So if you were like more of a human kind of like interest in your career, you would go to like this side. If you want to do like calculus and all this other like different professions, you would go to these other sides. And it was like really different the way that it approached. And I was interested in what you have to say about like this other kind of rationalization, I don't know, like this other process that it was like treated so separately, how can we like integrate to everyone's? But because I don't know if it is like individual differences, but as like Lisiane was saying, like the science, I think it is a lot about like definitions and methods and really ways of doing things, and in some way like creativity here says like it's new paths, new ways of doing this other things. So I was interested in what you have to say about like education.
Well, with education related to that, it made me think of in the Yale Med School, and I'm not sure if it's an elective or a required course, but I know there is a course that's offered, and it's offered to students to take a drawing class because it's what they are starting to realize. They believe that if you learn to draw and you're set in this learning how to see and focusing on observational skills and translating that, they're saying that it is really affording the students an opportunity to observe more when they're working in their profession of being a doctor, right? And these observational skills. So that's where I'm thinking that creative education, observing, translating information in a different way, in a creative way, in an art visual way, in a non-verbal way, can be very helpful. And it's not just then almost dedicated or isolated to people who want to follow a visual design profession. And I think that would be really, really great.
Again, Elisa made a question that made me think about the graduate students and how we foster their minds, let's say, as mentors in the same way as teaching in the art school. So we have to prepare them for the criticism of their papers that will be submitted and rejected, and all the steps where their work is evaluated, but at the same time foster the curiosity and the ability to sustain over the criticism over time. So I think this is perhaps the hardest, the softest, and the hardest enduring task in scientific career for those who pursue that. And this is how our students suffer most when they are they feel like a fraud or incapable, or they will not sustain the criticism. For instance, they cannot cope with that. So many barriers in the mentorship that sometimes the mentors don't foresee.
And that does happen in art as well, especially the first year of sustaining criticism over a period of time like that, because it goes, but it came from me, I was vulnerable, and you just knocked that down, right? And then how to keep going and saying, well, that was a first draft. It's not because you made it and it was then creative to you, it then it was a form of communication. It meant, it triggered that in us as well. And we'll speak about that in a critique setting. That's hard, but then that's where art profession is, I think, different than creativity, but there are, if it's, I was gonna say cousins, but there is overlap. But how grad students could benefit from the creative process as well, and for their well-being, I'd be interested in further discussing that.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you for this. I'm a wonder, how can I say this? I think art is more about art. I think it is the form you can conduce intervention in psycho disorders, for example, and I think you know about this more than me, and I want to how can you see about use the art and use drawing and this for a lot of deserted or anxiety or things like that? Because when I doing this, when I drawing or painting a lot of the things about art, I think you focus on in this and you feel more conscious about what you're doing, and this make me better, make me feel better feelings, and this maybe this can help some people feel bad feelings, and I wonder if what do you think about it? Use the art for my intervention for help people with, for making better mental health, you know?
Yeah, so that is, art therapy is a field that's separate from, is that what you're speaking about?
Yes,
art,
yes.
Art uses therapy. So that's an area where I would defer to art therapists to speak about, because I do think that I did have an art therapy grad student. She had her degree, she was an art therapist, and she came to get her Master's of Fine Art. And in doing so, she's like, oh, this is a very different approach to art making. There's really different kinds of questions that are being asked of me. And so I will say that I think that's really important, knowing that it's a tool that is used for, there's music therapy, art therapy, movement therapy that I can't personally or professionally speak about, but I think that it's really important, and I will encourage my students when they're interested in art and psychology to consider also that there's a Masters of Art Therapy as well to consider. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. It was awesome. What a way to conclude our meeting. And so let's go to some concluding remarks about rethinking the future. It's weird to say some concluding remarks about rethinking the future. So yeah, why there is a bird in the screen? So this is a bird called, in Brazil it's called João de Barro. In English is the ornith-oven termite bird. So it builds his nest with clay. It's a beautiful bird. Why I'm talking about birds? So yeah, I'm sorry guys. And I will talk about food as well. So yeah, so we are coming together to conclude this Rethinking the Future meeting. And so it's paramount that I emphasize how great was this meeting and all the contributions from all the speakers that came to Brazil, all our colleagues that came to São Paulo from different regions, and all people that participated here with great interactions, with great questions, great answers. I couldn't imagine something better than it was. It was, for me at least, it was so cool, so cool. And the environment that we created here, it was awesome because I think we really created an environment to foster collaboration between people here. And I'm pretty much sure that many people are already exchanging emails, interacting with each other, find ways to collaborate in future studies and so on and so on. So I think we achieved one of our goals, and I'm truly, truly, truly happy about that. But again, what about the birds? So let's go to the birds. So as I watched and learned from each lecture, I felt like I was doing two of my favorite things in life: bird watching and cooking. Not in this particular order, okay? I'm not killing the birds and then cooking them. No, so bird watching and cooking them. I know that might seem odd. Last week, I think some students get scared about me when I say that sometimes I fell in love with event-related potentials, like, for example, the N400. What a beautiful ERP component. So I was also listening to you and thinking on birding watching and food. And I will explain these things. So we are here to address potential paths, both in research to solve some global problems. So we are discussing these things. So we are discussing serious problems, and that we need to confront them. John mentioned something interesting. He said something like, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's still not the train. And yeah, it's still not the train, and you need to coordinate efforts to face this new challenge we have now. And I do lots of bird watchings. My tattoo is about bird watchings here, so I do lots of bird watchings, and we learn a lot from them, And one of the things that is beautiful, and it's the freedom and their beauty, and the freedom to fly. And we as beings that don't fly, we develop a way to fly, you know? And some people here at this room believe that it was the Wright brothers that developed the airplanes. I know, people from the US. But yeah, no, Walter, it was Santos Dumont that developed, yeah, I'm right? Yeah, I'm right, yeah. It was, so jokes aside, but birds teach us much more than just flight. It's a lot of lessons that we can learn from them, from this interconnectedness of life, the fragility of the ecosystems, and the need for harmonious coexistence. So the birds, they are all the time teaching. So when you see migratory, for example, routes of many birds, they span continents, showing the ecological balance of one region and how it influences places like thousands of kilometers away. And we are all the time doing things like that. So all the time we're interacting in this. Sometimes we think we are just in this small scale, but we are in a large scale world, and we need to think on this. So this emphasizes something that we discuss a lot here, the need to take a global perspective. So we need to think in institutions, we need to think in society, we need to think in countries. Of course, we need to think individually as well, and how we are interacting between each other, but I think we also need to tackle things thinking in not just an individual, but as a collective, So when you look also at the birds, we are going to see the value of biodiversity. Today we discuss emodiversity, and the parallel that June did, it was on the environment, so the ecological diversity. And when we look at the birds, we're going to see this. So here's some of my bird watching adventures. So yeah, so look at that. So they flock together. It's called anu branco. It's a beautiful. So when you see this, that there is the variety of behaviors, niches, and adaptations birds show us, the role of each species play in the ecosystem, and the damage that the loss of some of these can cause. I'm doing this parallel to draw the need to give some voices. So Elisa talked about the need to listen to the others, and when you take the parallel with birds, might it's not be so clear, but the idea is to give voices to the most diverse groups, rather just simply trying to silence those who think different from us and sometimes are not part of our group. So we need to listen everybody, different those that are different from us. Something that I'm almost thinking is wisdom is not something exclusive of some people. Everybody has some kind of wisdom, and we need to share this. And I think one of tackle the future, about this rethinking the future, is to listen everybody. And there are many other things that I wrote about the birds, but also one important thing is birds are all the time doing code response. Lisa talked about the code response things. All the time they are alarming us about things. Some birds, I think most of you know, some of them are signaling a predator. So at the end, it is the target because it's signaling something, but saving the others. And then we start thinking on how cooperation evolved across the species. And this is super important. And we are a cooperative species for the good and for the bad. And that is something we need to start thinking, how we foster our cooperative way as human beings to put people in doing the good. And also, so this is strength in unity, so they are all connected. So what about cooking? Cooking is something also. Oh, there's many birds. I forgot to show the birds here. So many different birds. Oh, this is beautiful, yeah. So the toucans, yeah, alarming something. Different birds sharing the same space together. Not all of them. Sometimes they fight, and we fight. It's beautiful, yeah. So they are feeding, yeah. So different birds. And what about food? Because we are all the time this weekend talking about many different topics, and if someone just arrive here and see a philosopher, and then a musician, and then a psychologist, you know, so a neuroscientist, and an artist, and probably say, what a mess is this meeting? What the fuck they are doing here? It's a mess. Everybody talking from different perspectives. What about the unity here? Because this is an important issue. But if you saw this week as at least I see it, at the end it made a lot of sense, at least for me, because we put different people talking to each other and propose interdisciplinary research. And this is all about food. Do you know which dish will come from this? An idea? Not feijoada, look at that. This is a Bulgarian dish. And that is the beauty of the thing. With ingredients that I have in Brazil, I can prepare a Bulgarian dish. But I need to respect the ingredients and I need to put them. But if I use it in a different way, look at that. What is the dish? This is a gnocchi. People in the lab know because I did it for them. If you look at this, then we start going to Indian food or Moroccan food. And that's the beauty of the thing. What was it? Oh, no. Yeah. So when looking on all these ingredients and food, I think it's, at least it's the way I see interdisciplinary research. Different background, different cultures, different countries, different regions, trying to solve complex problems, putting together what they know the best, trying together to turn down the criticism, the bad criticism. There is a good criticism. It's good to receive critiques, but the good criticism, in a way that we can put together our efforts to make things better. So that's why we are here. So Professor Walter, with his extensive interdisciplinary knowledge, spanning, you see guys, spanning from philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, he challenged us to ponder upon the ethical and moral dilemmas inherent to our society. He introduced us to new ways of studying moral questions, particularly with the model, the approach avoiding, and with multiple intersections of what might call good and bad, so all those diagrams. Some people prefer the poles diagram, some people prefer the water, but that is life, yeah. But that was something that I learned a lot here, so another way to understand morality. Through John Nasleck's work, we delved into some nuance of the pro-social behavior. He talked about benevolence, universalism, pro-sociality, and how they don't necessarily represent what people usually call transcendence, yeah, yeah, that's transcendence. Yeah, I got it. And in these lines, John introduced us to a concept of ideological sociability. There is different from usually we talk the interpersonal prosociability. Merzina, the coordinator of the forecast, provided some pivotal data for our contemplations on strategies to tackle climate change. She showcased the relationship between climate change, mitigation behavior, and personality, with results indicating the efforts to boost the climate change mitigation behavior need to factor in perceived efficacy of such actions. So the relationship between the perception and what we are doing. Professor Alex led us to reflect on the role of something that is becoming stronger and stronger, the collective narcissism and national identity in some political decisions and in addressing global shape and are shaped by the world. She provided with beautiful research, compelling data on how our brain similarly process the world based on the social distance between individuals. And this opened a huge avenue of research, huge avenue. She used the videos, but you can think in terms of politics, you can think in terms of many other issues. Professor Elisa reminded us of the context in which we conducted science and the need to broaden our horizons by being more inclusive. And she emphasized the importance of research methods that embrace diversity and circumvent the classic issue of study solely include we are the population. This is so important to move from that Eurocentric vision to a more Afrocentric vision and other things. And today we have Junie Gruber and Sabrina, and Junie provide crucial insights on hemodiversity and mental health, on positive emotional disturbance, and some paths, particularly on the need to understand mental health and well-being on the young adults, and the need to capturing the diverse background of people. And Sabrina provided me with the creativity, with the arts, and how we need to embrace these kind of things, and even to talk. If you go to that panel there, it's beautiful to see what each one of us produced here. It was a beautiful experience. As Anna, while she was asking you about how she felt good while producing it, and I think this probably many of us felt that, because in our daily lives we're not sitting for a while to draw, to make art, to play some musical instruments, to share our creative views of the, and that was beautiful. And again, thank you very much. All the time you come here, you provide us with such great experiences. And let me just see if I'm missing something here. And that is it. So we made it. I think we made it, yeah. And so I'd like to thank all speakers. Thank you very much for coming. It's a long journey to Brazil, and thank you very much. And this is, like you see with Junie and Sabrina, this is the first time you are coming to Brazil. We are going to have the second, the third, the fourth, and so on, so on. And I would like to thank all the members of our National Institute. Thank you very much for coming. This institute is getting shape, I think. We are moving forward. Also from people that are joining us via Zoom. And also I'd like to thank deeply my team, these people here. Oh my God. I have no words to thank them, no words. It's a privilege to have a group like these guys working with me on a daily basis. You see, what you see here during this week, they are like that all days. All days. Can you imagine people like that sharing things with you, helping each other? It's beautiful. So I don't know what to say to you guys, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. In the lab, we say that we put together excellence and cooperation, and couldn't be better. Thank you, guys. Thank you. And finally, I would like to thank the funding agents, CAPS, CNPq, FAPESP, and Mackenzie. And in Mackenzie, I would like to, I think in the first day, the president, the director, and many people. Today I would like to thank, in the name of all this administrative staff, I would like to thank Elisangela. She's not here, but I would like to thank Elisangela. People that came from abroad exchanged many mails with Elisangela. She's awesome. She's out there to address any issue we have. She's from the, we have a kind of administrative staff to take care of our research projects, and she was allocated to take care of me because I do many mistakes, and so they put the best one to help me, and she's helping me a lot and working with us directly. So thank you, Elisangela. And yeah, that is it. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this week, and hope to see you all soon.